House will come back to order. House will come back to order. The clerk will ring the bell. Clerk will read the caption to a group of privilege resolutions. The clerk will read.
Recognizing Miss Eloise Scott Archibald. Congratulating Miss Leola Wiggins Jordan on the grand occasion of her 90th birthday. Commending Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Inc. and the Georgia District chapters, and recognizing February 18, 2016 as Alpha Phi Alpha Day at the state capitol. Recognizing and commending Shamika Root Randolph, Morrow Middle School's 2015-2016 Teacher of the Year. Commending Miss Clay Andrew White, Jewel C. Anderson Elementary School's Teacher of the Year. Recognizing and commending Mr. Jose M. Osario, Robert T. Smith Elementary School's 2015-2016 Teacher of the Year. Recognizing and commending Mrs. Jamie Moser, Austin Road Elementary School's 2015-2016 Teacher of the Year. Recognizing and commending Mrs. Ashen T. Irvin, East Clayton Elementary School's 2015-2016 Teacher of the Year. Recognizing and commending Miss Stephanie Anderson, Clayton County's Public Schools 2015-2016 Teacher of the Year. Recognizing and commending Dr. Mohan Sanhasivan, Stockbridge's High School's 2016 Teacher of the Year. Recognizing and commending Turner County Sheriff Andy Hester. Recognizing the month of July 2016 as Fibroid Awareness Month at the State Capitol. Recognizing and commending Rob G. Mickle, Esquire. Recognizing Blod of Fierce Girls and commending its founder, Ms. Shakina Moore. Recognizing February 21st, 2016 as Hair Loss Epidemic Summit Day in Georgia. Recognizing February 21st through 27th, 2016 as Eating Disorders Awareness Week at the Capitol in conjunction with the observance of National Eating Disorders Awareness Week. Recognizing and commending Stephen Lee, honoring the life and memory of Mrs. Dorothy Jean Rigby Anneton. Commending Mrs. Dorothy C. Benson as the Distinguished Older Georgian for 2016. Recognizing and commending Miss A. Davida Bynum on the occasion of her retirement as Executive Director of the Columbus Community Center. Recognizing October 3 through 7, 2016 as Georgia Pre-K Week at the Capitol. Recognizing February 21st through 27th, 2016 as National Entrepreneur Week at the State Capitol. Recognizing and commending Mr. Henry Hank Thomas, and for other purposes, that completes the reading of the privilege resolutions.
Is there objection to adopting the privilege resolutions? The chair hears none, and the resolutions are adopted. Before we go back to the rules calendar, I want the House to know that we are now back to full strength. And please help me welcome our newest member to the House, the lady from the 58th House District, Representative Park Cannon. Representative Cannon. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 831. House Bill 831.
House Bill 831 by Representative Smyrie, the 135th, and others to be entitled an act to amend Part 4 of Article 3 of Chapter 2 of Title 38, the official code of Georgia annotated relating the rights, privileges, and prohibitions for certain military personnel. This bill has been referred to the Committee on Defense and Veteran Affairs. The committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes the Dean of the Georgia House of Representatives, Chairman Smyrie, to present the bill.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House, I bring to you House Bill 831, and I want to thank the members who have worked with me on it, Scott of the 76 and Hitchens of the 161 and Smith of the 134th and Abrams of the 89th. And I want to thank the chairman of the committee. We had a great discussion, and this is a bill that would give protection to guardsmen who've been called up for active duty. And this bill passed out of the Defense and Veterans Affairs Committee. And if you're like me, I represent a lot of military people in Columbus, and those of y'all who have military bases in your district, this bill commonly referred to as the Protecting Guardsmen Employment Act, and it simply states that if you call up to active duty, if you're in the National Guard, a guardsman in your state, and you get called up to active duty, then you would get your job back when you came back from active duty. I think this is something that's long overdue. The people that allow us the freedom that we have here in our country and in our state, and I think rightfully so, it would give them the opportunity to come back to their job of employment and their place of employment if they were called up to active duty in a neighboring state. So this is something that I recommend to you and commend to you, and this is something that I've heard from when I went home after introducing this bill. I was really totally surprised at the calls that I had, and when I went around town in Columbus, and people were thanking me and saying that this was something that should have been done a long time ago, and I agree with them. But here we are, and I want to commend to you House Bill 831, which would allow guardsmen who are called back into active duty in a neighboring state to be allowed to go back to their rightful place of employment. So that's the gist of the bill, Mr. Speaker. It's a good bill right after lunch. Everybody's had a great time after lunch, and now come back and be able to do something good for the people. Good lunch, good bill. Let's have a good vote.
Are you waiting for questions?
I didn't think anybody asked me a question on
You don't have any.
Any, Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to any questions if anybody had any.
You have no questions.
All right, thank you very much, and please vote for House Bill 831.
Chair recognizes Representative Taylor, Chairman Taylor, to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dean of the House, I rise in support of your bill. It's a very good bill. Just a little history. I have a constituent and a member that I represent, General John King, who commands the 48th Brigade Combat Team in the Georgia National Guard. He's done 4 deployments, 1 year each, 2 years in Afghanistan, 2 years in Iraq. He is also the chief of police at Doraville, and the city, because of his deployments, sought to fire him. He had to spend a lot of his own personal money in court and everything, and I just want to say that I really respect you bringing this bill forward, because people that serve in many ways, but serve our country, should not have their jobs at risk for that. And with that, I'll yield the well. Thank you.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 831 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of House Bill 831. The ayes are 165. The nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 859. House Bill 859.
House Bill 859 by Representative Jaspers, the 11th and others, to be titled an act to amend Part 3 of Article 4, Chapter 11 of Title 16. The official code of Georgia annotated relating to carrying and possession of firearms so as to authorize the carrying and possession of certain weapons by weapons carry license holders in or on certain buildings or real property owned or leased to public institutions of post-secondary education. This bill having referred to the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Okay, before the chair recognizes the author of this bill, let's do a little refresher, because the Rules Committee has when I finish, I'm going to assume that everyone heard what I said and proceed accordingly. The Rules Committee has limited debate on this bill to 1 hour, with the time to be allocated at the discretion of the chair, and has been the chair's practice, I will allocate 30 minutes to those speaking in favor of the bill and 30 minutes to those speaking in opposition to the bill. In addition to that, we will have a minority report, and under the rules of the House, Those speaking on the minority report will have a collective total of 20 minutes, and the chairman's time in conclusion, and that will be 20 minutes also. The time will be strictly enforced. The chair will not get into how individual members divide up the 30 minutes per side, but at the end of 30 minutes, then that will complete the presentation by each side. So with that, Chair recognizes Chairman Jaspers to present House Bill 859.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Dean of the House, Representative Smyrie, said, this is a good bill for after lunch. Steal your thunder there a little bit. But thank you for letting me present to you today House Bill 859. It's what I like to call the Campus Safety Act. We're here today working to allow Georgians the ability to not be a victim on our college and university campuses. Yes, that's the bottom line, not be a victim. I thought about it naming it a number of different things, like the Victim-Free Crime Zone Bill or whatever, because I know those don't mean much, because it will not prevent all the abuse and attacks by the folks who want us to do Georgians harm on these campuses. We can put our heads in the sand and say nothing is happening, but the numbers don't lie. The number of criminal offenses on campuses continues to rise. 99 sex offenses that are categorized as forcible in 2014. A total of 143 violent crimes against Georgians who are attending our schools. In 2010, that number was 77. No matter what, the number is far too many. For your information, that data is from the U.S. Department of Education website on campus safety and security data. What this bill does is allow those Georgians who have a Georgia weapons carry license to be able to defend themselves from a threat if it presents itself. These Georgians are at least 21 years old, have been fingerprinted, had their background searched by the GBI and FBI databases, and a probate judge in the county in which they live has evaluated this information. I always like to say these folks are responsible men and women of Georgia who want to utilize their constitutional right to defend themselves. They can now carry in grocery stores, some churches, big box stores, our parks, buses, and government buildings all around us every day. You don't hear about these Georgians being dangerous people. It just doesn't happen. The current Georgia law allows for the keeping of a weapon in one's car at a public college or university. They must leave it there when they leave their vehicle, no matter what time, day, or night, no matter what the personal threat they may have against them. The penalty for carrying a weapon today on a campus is if you have a Georgia weapons carry license, it's a misdemeanor, and a felony if you don't. This bill does not change that. Yeah, it does, excuse me. On the felony, it doesn't. And while I'm saying it, it's a real-world solution to a real-world problem. I wish, as everyone in here does, that the women and men who attend these schools and walk among all of us didn't have to do this, but in today's world, it's a must. It's their constitutional right, and we need to restore it. When you look at the bill, you'll see it's pretty simple. We are in the school safety part of the code and the prohibited spaces. Starting on line 15, we want to allow those with a Georgia weapons carry license to carry in the school safety zone in a public college or university. Line 19, the places that are not allowed, the fraternity and sorority houses at a campus, dormitories, and athletic sporting events. Line 23 only applies the carrying of handguns that are concealed. This is a change from the past. We're proposing concealed only, and you see the language. Starting on line 27, it's a term that defines what concealment is and what it's not, flashing, etc., so that's not an issue. Mr. Speaker, I want to continue my presentation by answering a few questions that's been out there in the committee meetings and on TV. And one of them was, well, the bill doesn't allow guns in dorms or sporting events, so gun storage facilities would have to be constructed so that guns could be properly stored when students go back to their dorms or other places where guns can't be carried. There's no basis for a college to assume the responsibility for storing a weapon. Other off-limits places, like our courthouses, inside the security zone of Hartsville Airport, do not provide storage facilities for Georgia weapons carry license holders. When I take the responsibility of my safety, I have to also take the responsibility to carry where I can and store it when I have to. College students will have to do like the rest of us and secure their firearm elsewhere. I'd like to continue along that line. Projected additional expenses will be increased to security, since campus security would have to prepare for a scenario that many or all students over 21 would be carrying. Well, only the students with a Georgia weapons license will be legal to carry a handgun on a campus. It's estimated that roughly 10% of the population of Georgia over 21 has one of these licenses. That's 750,000 people. Only about half the people I know carry a weapon all the time. The other half carry it when they want to, sometimes. We always remember that these folks have been fingerprinted, vetted by the Georgia GBI and FBI. They currently carry their firearms in almost all areas of the state without incident. So why would a college suddenly need to add security? These people don't suddenly become dangerous when they step onto a campus. If I was a student and a taxpayer, as we are, I would be insulted if more security was hired to protect me from law-abiding Georgians instead of hiring more security to protect them from robbers and rapists. The Georgia weapons license holders are statistically the most law-abiding citizens in our state. And I think it's bordering on offensive to suggest that they will conduct themselves any less thoughtfully or lawfully the moment they set foot in a university building. When we look at Colorado, since they enacted campus safety back in 2002, they've only had one incident by an employee in 15 years. Mr. Speaker, that's what I have to say, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that the members may have.
You have some questions. Do you care to yield?
Yes, sir, I do.
Chair recognizes the minority leader of the House to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to first draw your attention to line 15 of your bill. The language reads that any license holder, when he or she is in any building on real property. You a moment ago spoke to the fact that only 170,000 students would be entitled to carry. Can you show me in this language where the ability to carry on a college campus would be limited to students?
It would not be. It says anyone who's a Georgia weapons license. I didn't say anything about 170,000 people either.
Actually, you did in...
I said there are 750,000 Georgians who currently have this license.
Sir, did you not, in response or in anticipation of a question regarding the need for providing safety on campus and a place to secure the weapons, make reference to a number of the number of students who would be eligible to carry a weapon on Georgia's campus? I believe the number you used was 170,000 students in the state of Georgia.
I said roughly 10% of the population over 21 has a Georgia weapons license. And I said that's about 750,000 people. Only about half the people I know have a Georgia weapons carry license who carry all the time, and half don't.
So you did not refer to a number of students who...
No, ma'am, I don't think so.
To the expense that would be instituted by schools in order to meet the number of students who are on campus?
No, ma'am, I don't believe I did. But let's go ahead.
So can you speak to the cost of securing weapons on campus, since any person would be allowed to bring a weapon onto campus, not simply college students who are enrolled at that school?
To secure a weapon. I think I answered that in the questions at the end. Yeah, we don't think just because the person who's had that Georgia weapons license is going to be a criminal or do anything wrong that they haven't done in the past. Yeah, we do say that there are places they don't carry. When I carry now in the public, there are places I can't carry and I have to leave it in my car, just like in this building.
Okay. If I can draw your attention to line 19. The language there says it does not apply to buildings or properties used for athletic sporting events. Can you speak to the penumbra of what constitutes an athletic facility or athletic sporting event or athletic facility? That is, what is the line of demarcation when a gun would be permitted and when a gun would not be permitted?
Well, in the building or property where there's an athletic sporting event, they could not inside of that building.
So would that apply to?
A stadium,
Would it apply to the parking lot of the
volleyball.
stadium?
No, ma'am, parking lots are okay under current Georgia law to have one in the parking lot of any university campus.
So the parking lot that is within the state property for a school, this would continue to allow students to now carry weapons into the parking lot of a school athletic facility if it's not a separate facility?
They are currently allowed on anywhere, on any facility, to have one in their vehicle,
Okay.
anywhere on the university campus.
And then my last question is, you referenced at the beginning sexual offenses that are committed on campus.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you speak to the number of crimes that were committed by fellow students as opposed to by non-students on those campuses?
No, ma'am, I can't. The data that I've got from the U.S. Department of Education doesn't show that. I wish it did. I would be curious to know that too.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Chair recognizes Representative Petrie to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Chairman. Do you yield?
Yes, sir, I do.
Is it not true that the background checked licensees of this country are one of the most responsible and law-abiding demographics in this country?
Yes, sir, that's absolutely true.
And do you further yield?
Yes, sir.
Is it not true that the number of licensed concealed carry permit holders in Georgia has increased by 130% since 2007?
Yes, sir.
And do you further yield?
Yes, sir.
And is it also not true that in that same time, the violent crime rate in Georgia is down by 25%?
That's absolutely true. Thank you.
And one last question, if you yield, one last question.
Absolutely.
And is it also not true that the rate of violent crime on campuses at Georgia universities has risen by 85% in that same time since the criminalization of self-defense on Georgia university campuses?
That's absolutely true.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative.
Do you further yield, or would
Yes,
you
sir.
like to give
I'll-
time for the others that have signed up to speak to speak?
I would love to answer questions, but I really want the other speakers to be able to speak, Mr. Speaker, so I'll yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Chair recognizes Representative Ballinger to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak on behalf of HB 859. As many of you know, I worked as a victim advocate with the prosecuting attorney's office. In that capacity, I assisted countless victims who were dealing with the terrible things that had happened to them. These were victims of some of the most terrible crimes you can imagine: murder, rape, aggravated assault. At that stage in the process, all I could do was get them counseling, hold their hand, and speak for them throughout the judicial process. They were already victims. I believe one of the most important parts of my job as a state representative is to continue to speak to victims and on their behalf. Today, I stand in support of HB 829 to speak for them again. Only this time I implore you to permit them the opportunity to avoid becoming a victim. I speak today asking you to empower would-be victims with the ability to defend themselves, to stand up to predators that would otherwise prey on them because they are smaller, weaker, older, disabled, or simply outnumbered. As a nation, we have determined that it is appropriate for 18-year-olds and older to fight in our military to defend this country. Those brave young women and men are deployed all over the world in our country's defense. As a legislative body, we have agreed that those Georgians 21 and older can apply for and obtain a permit to carry a concealed weapon. But for some reason, we restrict our citizens' right to protect themselves on college campuses, as if crime doesn't occur on campus. We force the diminutive female college student, the wheelchair-bound grad student, the non-traditional single mom returning to school at night to complete her degree, to subject themselves to the will of those that would prey on them precisely because of their size, sex, disability, or age, and in a location where they have been deliberately disarmed. Even if, like me, students must park far from campus, they are made easy prey by the university's Victims Everywhere policy. Forced to disarm and traverse areas both on and off campus in a very high crime area, I was stripped of my right to defend myself both on and off campus. And predators, while cowardly, will choose to prey upon those who have no means to defend themselves. They are all too aware that folks on college campuses have been stripped of their right to defend themselves. We have taken from them their ability to defend themselves. If you believe in equality and justice for all, regardless of someone's age, gender, or disability, I encourage you to pass this bill. If, however, you believe that women and men across this state must give up their right to defend themselves in order to seek a higher education, vote no. However, if you vote no, I would suggest you be willing to volunteer as a victim advocate and be willing to hold a victim's hand and look in their eye and explain your vote. And I hope you remember this vote every time you hug your daughter, son, or spouse goodbye and send them off to class. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, empower our university students with the right to defend themselves. Vote yes on HB 829. Mr. Speaker, I know there are a lot of more people to speak on the bill, so at this time I will yield the well.
The lady has yielded the well. Chair recognizes Representative Hightower to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oftentimes when I come before you and speak about gun bills, I talk about the Second Amendment and its history in our country and how the Second Amendment was given to us to allow us to protect ourselves against, if needed, our own government. But I'm not going to go into that today because we all know the Second Amendment very well. What I want to talk to y'all about is a shift in the way we think. Our legal system works, or is supposed to work, on an innocent till proven guilty. And I think we'd all would agree with that. We're innocent until proven guilty. But overall, I think as a society, we've changed. We now are evaluating people on a guilty until proven innocent. And the reason I feel that way is because I sit on Judiciary Non-Civil, and I see each year different members coming to us with a new felony here, a new felony there, a mandatory minimum here, a mandatory minimum there, and they're evaluating these bills from we want to catch the worst person. They've already are evaluating these bills as if everyone is already evil, everyone's bad, and they want this felony because they want to catch these bad people. But what they don't sometimes do is slow down and evaluate, well, what if an innocent person gets caught up in that legal system? And now you've put on them standard minimums that are keeping them in jail for half of their life. And now they're convicted felons because they're caught up in this system and they're guilty till proven innocent. There's been a paradigm shift in our society, and it's one that we slowly need to tilt back the way it was originally supposed to be. And a bill like this is a prime example of that very issue. We're talking about innocent people protecting themselves, not convicted felons, not people who are guilty of anything. But yet we want to put restrictions on these innocent people. We want to tell them, because of these outrageous acts of a few, we're going to limit what you can do. Because these few are guilty of heinous crimes, we're going to hold you all guilty. And we're going to restrict all your rights. That's what we're doing. What this bill does is trying slowly but surely to flip that back around and let you be innocent till proven guilty. I want to allow those innocent individuals to have their rights. I want those innocent individuals to have the ability to protect themselves from those few who are going to commit those heinous crimes. But oftentimes we're scared to do that. We're scared to do that because we're too scared about what the possibility can be because of the acts of those few individuals that commit those heinous crimes. In the national anthem, land of the free and home of the brave. This is an opportunity for us to be brave. Society is telling us over and over, day after day, that we need to be fearful. And the reason we need to be fearful is because guns are bad, because look at all these mass killings. No, what we need to be is brave. We need to be brave enough to trust our fellow citizens that they are innocent at heart, that they are innocent until proven guilty, that they are innocent and should have the ability to protect themselves from evil. They should have the ability to protect their home, their wife, their children. And this bill is a step in the right direction. Is it everything that I would have wanted? No. I would have liked to have seen this go a little bit further and allow them to be able to carry them in dorms. But sometimes you take steps to get where you need to be. This bill is a step in the right direction. This bill shows the citizens of Georgia that we trust them. At least those that are willing to do the right thing and go and get their carry permit, put their fingerprint down, get a background check. We're telling those individuals, we want to trust you. We're going to allow you to be innocent until proven guilty, and we're not going to hold you accountable for the actions of those heinous few. And that's what we're really debating about. And again, I know this is all rooted in the Second Amendment, but y'all have all heard me preach about the Second Amendment. Look at this as a shift to evaluate our citizens from a new place and allow them to have the freedoms to protect themselves. I ask that you vote in favor of HB 859. Thank you.
Gentleman has yielded the well. To those who have signed up to speak in favor of the proposition, the chair will let you know that you have 8 minutes and 45 seconds left amongst 3 of you. Chair recognizes Chairman Setzler to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, the time is short this afternoon, but I did want to thank the author of the bill, and I'd like to thank the members of this body who are bringing forward a great, balanced bill that I believe takes care of the small person. If you imagine a young lady pushing a baby cart down North Avenue, walking onto the Georgia Tech campus to show her young child or kids where she went to school, the idea that you can walk down North Avenue bearing arms to exercise your right to protect yourself, and then face the current reality that as soon as she turns onto the Georgia Tech campus, she's now committing a felony under Georgia law, just doesn't pass the common sense test. I'd like to thank this General Assembly because what we're talking about here is public college campuses. We're talking about campuses that we as a public have an obligation to protect. We're talking about circumstances where there are 21-year-olds or older, in many cases non-traditional students or military veterans. We're talking about a bill that doesn't allow weapons in dorms, for frat houses or sporting events. And we're talking about a circumstance that addresses a concern that I've heard from faculty members of the idea that brandishing rifles and weapons on campus is inconsistent with education. This bill's duty to conceal the firearm is a balanced middle ground step that I think everybody in this body ought to be able to support. Like representatives before me said, we could certainly go further. Perhaps if we recognized the fundamental Second Amendment rights as strongly as we should, perhaps we would be advised to do so. But I'd like to thank the author, I'd like to thank this body and ask for strong and overwhelming support for HB 859 today. It's a balanced bill, it's a bill we can all be proud of, and it's a bill that very importantly protects Georgians.
Gentleman has yielded the well. The chair recognizes Representative Kelly to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to be before this body today speaking in favor of a bill that will certainly provide safety to college students on Georgia campuses that are simply trying to get an education so that they can improve their lives and one day provide for their family. Mr. Speaker, as I was thinking about the measure that came before us today, I was kind of just going through some things online, and I happened to see something that was put out by the opposition party regarding this. It says, Georgia Democrats are for the Second Amendment, but. And Mr. Speaker, it hit me back to the time of my childhood when occasionally I would get in trouble and I would have a good excuse. And my dad would say, you don't need to do that. And I'd say, but. He goes, but nothing. This is the way it is. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say that this is not common practice for the opposition party. But we can look at the First Amendment, and they're for the First Amendment, but when it offends someone. Mr. Speaker, they're for the 10th Amendment, but when it's Barack Obama and his federal government overreaching into our state, hurting our farmers and limiting our energy opportunities. Mr. Speaker, they're for transparency unless it's Hillary Clinton and her classified emails on her personal server. And Mr. Speaker, they are for the Second Amendment, but they want to restrict where we can carry it, what type of gun we can carry, and where we can buy it. Mr. Speaker, it's time that we help so many college students that are in need. I'm holding here a campus notification from a year ago today from a student just down the street that was robbed by two individuals with a knife. Mr. Speaker, on May 28th of last year, a staff member reported he was robbed at gunpoint. Mr. Speaker, on December the 10th, 2015, two students were robbed at gunpoint in their private residence. At another school, we've had over 320 instances of rape, robberies, assault, and burglaries outside of our dorm rooms over the last 3 years. Mr. Speaker, today, this issue is about safety. But Mr. Speaker, also, the time is now to say no more buts because the Constitution says so. And I'll yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Chair recognizes Representative Heath Clark to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to make it clear that today we're not voting to allow guns on campus. Guns are already on campus. People are being robbed at gunpoint in college buildings, on college campuses. Guns are there. What we're voting on today is to allow law-abiding citizens the opportunity to defend themselves on college campuses. And I, like some of the other speakers, want to just acknowledge that, I introduced a bill last year that has gotten some attention to be against this bill, but I want to just publicly thank the author of this bill for introducing this legislation that does have some things that doesn't go as far as we might like it to go, but he has worked hard to get a bill before this body that has an opportunity to get to the governor's desk and get signed into law. So I just want to encourage, I know time is short, but I want you to remember that the name Chris Mintz. He was a veteran of our military, served this country, went overseas and defended this country with honor, came back home, went to a school in Oregon and was shot. We can trust men and women of the military to go overseas and carry a weapon and defend this country, but when they come back home, we do not trust them to go to class and defend themselves. That is unimaginable. And I want to ask this body for favorable consideration of HB 859.
That concludes those who have signed up to speak in favor of the measure. We will now have 30 minutes of those who have signed up to speak in opposition, and the chair recognizes the chair of the Minority Party Caucus, Chairman Flood, to speak on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Two guys were sitting in a bar in Atlanta, the Hollywood of the South. One guy says to the other guy, I got a great idea for a movie. And I bet we can get the legislatures to support it because it's an election year. And I bet we can get some folks out of D.C. to support it because they may sell some more product. So here's the pitch. Let's give a bunch of 21-year-olds loaded guns, give them no instruction, no training, and no supervision. Let's put these young adults on college campuses all over the state of Georgia. Then put them in volatile situations with alcohol, with drugs, with hormones, and with all kinds of emotions. Now let's create a backstory where these young folks can react calmly and coolly in the face of imminent danger, just like Tom Cruise or Wesley Snipes or Jason Bourne. Now let's build up this dramatic scenario where there's an active shooter and people are running and screaming and diving for cover. Now let's have this untrained shooter pick out the bad guy, stop, aim, and shoot the villain without any harm to him or herself or to any innocent bystander. Cut! This isn't a movie. This state makes billions of dollars on make-believe. But here today we're talking about real people, precious college students. Let me share some real facts. The college and university presidents, faculty, and staff across this state do not support this bill. The people who attend and work at these universities ought to be the ones that are making decisions because they are the ones who have to live by these decisions. They also have to live with the costs and the liability. Michael Brower of the Association of Florida Colleges estimates it would cost $74 million to beef up security on Florida's 28 colleges and university campuses. According to the Houston Chronicle, campus carry is going to cost the University of Texas system $47 million to update security, build gun storage facilities, and bolster campus police units. 5 of Idaho's university and community colleges have already spent $1.5 million, and they're going to spend another $3.7 million this year. Arizona, the price tag is going to reach $10 million for 3 campuses. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the movies. We have to make real life decisions. Now, if we really want to help college students, let's means test the Hope Scholarship to give every Georgia student the opportunity to earn a college degree. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Drenner, Representative Carla Drenner, to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition of House Bill 859. As a college professor and who is also a proud mother of a 19-year-old who attends UGA, while some argue that good guys with guns would increase campus safety, overwhelming evidence suggests that more guns on campus would place students at risk. As a college professor, I believe that campus carry legislation is a deliberate act to remove local control from higher education officials who I believe are in the best position to determine what appropriate measures must be taken to preserve the safety, security, and academic environments of their schools. In addition, I firmly believe that the presence of concealed weapons will only increase the public safety risk to campus communities and are inappropriate in an educational setting. The overwhelming majority of 4,400 colleges and universities in the United States prohibit the carrying of firearms on their campuses. These gun-free policies have helped to make our post-secondary education institutions some of the safest in the country. Once academic institutions are stripped of their right to set gun policies for students and faculty, almost no other barriers remain that would keep schools from becoming gun-filled zones. Federal law prohibits persons under 21 years from buying handguns, but it does not prohibit kids as young as 18 from possessing them. Yet the effect of any policy to arm students and teachers will be to undermine school safety and academic freedom and supplant it with a culture of gun carrying that is completely foreign to those institutions. As everyone that has lived through as adolescence and young adulthood knows, the college age years, 18 to 24, are among the most volatile periods in a person's life. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has consistently found that criminal gun possession is highest for youth 18 to 24, with the ages 19 to 21 providing an even higher peak within this range. These also happen to be the peak years for persons to commit violent gun crimes, including homicides. Rather than making anyone feel safer, allowing students to possess and use firearms on college campuses will likely breed fear and paranoia among fellow students, since no one will know whether the other person can simply retrieve or pull out a gun if a dispute arises. Such fear and paranoia is antithetical to creating the kind of climate where free and open academic debate and learning thrive. No one needs a PhD to understand that introducing guns among binge drinking, drug using, suicide contemplating, hormone raging college students is good policy. Academic freedom is a vital, cherished concept in our nation. It ensures that schools, teachers, and students can carry all aspects of the educational process in pursuit of knowledge without due interference. Protecting free expression of teachers and students is the most obvious way in which academic freedom must be secured. While free expression is tremendously important, academic freedom means more than simply letting teachers and students speak their minds. It also means respecting the need for academic institutions to be able to make independent decisions about the wide range of matters that surround the educational enterprise. Just as outsiders should not dictate what questions a teacher may ask or what answers a student may offer, schools should be given the authority and discretion to set policies that shape the academic environment in which teaching and learning will occur. Lastly, as a parent, my primary concern is for my daughter, especially when she's at college. She's 19. The thought that our daughters, your daughter and my daughter, could be surrounded by students making impulsive and occasionally dangerous decisions while carrying a firearm or be expected to defend themselves with a gun is not something that I am willing to accept. It is up to us to make sure that our students feel safe on campuses, and so I would ask you to vote no on HB 859. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Lady has yielded the well. Chair recognizes Representative Dewey McLean to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to my colleagues in the House. You know, I rise in opposition of this bill. You know, it's very hard for me when I speak to my grandkids. Also, when I speak with my children, who I feel that are college grades, college age. And I spoke to my grandson on yesterday, and he asked me a question. He said, "Grandpa, did you have guns while you were in college?" I says, "No, grandson, didn't have any guns in college." He said, "Well, Grandpa, did Mama have any?" I said, "No, Mama didn't have any either." And he says, "Well, I'm only 12. I says, "Why do I?" I says, "Well, we're in different times. But I want to say that the times are not that much different. And I do want to say that he's a young athlete, and I do want to say thanks very much for not making athletic events a gun-free zone. I want to say thank you very much. But my vote is a no for several reasons. Public safety for the fans, because if you've ever been to a tailgate, you all know what a tailgate's like. Public safety for the families of the tailgate, we all know what the tailgate's like. Public safety for the athletes, the coaches, and the administrators. You know, if you've ever been to a tailgate, you know you really don't want to see the opposing team. And if I can take my gun there, it is not really a safe zone. I think it's an overreach of this body to put that type of pressure on a 21-year-old. All that 21-year-old wants is an education, and I think that we need to provide that education for that person to make sure that he or she can go back to their community and be a productive citizen. I urge you all to vote no on HB 859 because, again, the parents who must fund this expense for guns on campus, someone has to fund this. And tuition is going up every year, fees are going up every year. And the last thing that my daughter said to me was, Daddy, I may not afford to pay for my son to go to college. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Patty Bentley to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I stand before you proudly to speak against House Bill 859. I'm here this afternoon to speak up for female students. If this bill passes, our female college students will be going off to college this fall. And if this bill passes, they will go to college living in fear of their lives and their bodies. Supporters of this campus carry bill see an opportunity with recent high-profile campus sexual assault cases to push for more campus carry laws. But I'm here to say that guns on college campuses are not the answer to keeping women safe on college campus. It is arming the very predators who currently use alcohol, drugs, and intimidation. On college campuses, our children should be exposed to the wonder of learning, not worrying about who's carrying a concealed weapon. Sexual and dating violence is pervasive on college campuses. 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted while in college. 32% of female students report having been abused by a dating partner. Unfortunately, college campuses are widespread with alcohol, depression, and various mental illnesses that are typically addressed during a young adult's college career. A dangerous formula that may be made deadly by adding guns to the mix. Moreover, research shows that alcohol is involved in most campus sexual assaults, and alcohol leads to impaired judgment about gun use. Even if the gun isn't fired, it might convince a sophomore dating a senior not to fight back. Or worse, to not report her rape because she fears her life. Additionally, we should be focused on addressing issues of domestic violence in our state. In Georgia, did you know, in Georgia, domestic violence homicide by firearm is also widespread? Our state ranks 9th in the nation of its rate of men killing women in single victim homicides, and guns are by far the leading cause of death in Georgia domestic violence cases. Further, Georgia ranks highest in the nation in teen dating violence, and the majority of relationships that end in homicide begin with victims in their high school or college years. Also, allowing guns on college campuses will endanger our students. Let me say that again, make sure you hear me. Allowing guns on college campus will endanger our students, particularly those in abusive relationships, and could cost Georgia students their lives. Supporters of this bill would tell you that only mad men shoot on college campuses, and that is for the protection of students. However, under current gun laws, only those 21 years or older are allowed a concealed carry permit. This means that nearly 75% of those on college campuses will not have access to weapons because they are under the age of 21. 75% will be staring in the faces of their college students in the cafeterias, hoping that no one provokes him or her into action or the outset of mental illness that typically occurs during the early 20s. I want you to keep in mind, colleagues, what I said. You have to be 21 years old to get a concealed weapons permit. 75% of college students on campus will not have access to that opportunity to get a concealed weapon. I am a mother and an aunt to 2 female college students, and I'm very concerned about all students across the state, all students, particularly my nieces that are currently living on Georgia college campuses. And the thought of someone's daughter being surrounded by students making impulsive and occasionally dangerous decisions while carrying a firearm or be expected to defend themselves with a gun is something that I'm not willing to accept. And I hope that you will join me in not accepting that. I hope that you, my colleagues, will join me in thinking about the safety of our female college students on our Georgia campuses. Colleagues, I hope you join me in voting against House Bill 859. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the well. Thank you for your attention.
Chair recognizes Representative Oliver to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my tens of thousands constituents, on behalf of the 300+ people who messaged me this weekend, on behalf of at least one student who communicated with me about the experience of being in a shootout on another campus in another state in lockdown for 6 hours, on behalf of the many faculty members, including law enforcement faculty members on college campuses, all of whom asked me to speak against this bill, and on behalf of myself personally, I ask you to vote against House Bill 859. House Bill 859 will not increase the safety of our campuses or our state. It is not about victimhood. It is about increasing the opportunity for mayhem and gun violence in our state. It is about increasing the opportunity for shootouts, reckless, uncontrolled behaviors that we see in our state on a daily basis. Most of the bills that we come to this well about have very small and very focused purposes. They help some people, they smooth some edges, they increase the efficiencies of some processes, and they do no harm. Ladies and gentlemen, this bill will do harm. It will do harm in a very grievous manner. We are not going to be safer in our cities, in our towns, in our campuses by increasing the number above 33,000, that is the number today, of deaths by guns across this country. Of the 33,000 gun violent deaths in our country, 6,000 approximately are minors. To give you a perspective on the 6,000 gun deaths every year of minors, many of you remember the polio scares, the deaths from polio. Annually, the deaths from polio during the worst of that epidemic was 3,000. Gun violence of minors doubles the deaths of polio. Ladies and gentlemen, the reality is that of the 33,000 approximate gun violent deaths a year, over half are suicides. Mental illness occurs as its initial dramatic, tragic event, most often between 18 and 21. It results frequently without any warning, without any prior symptoms of mental illness, and it comes from a position of impulsive, reckless, and frightened young people. Let me say a couple of things again about victimhood. I think that Ms. Ballinger and I both have had a lot of experience in courts representing victims, and we work together on protecting those victims. I've had the experience when I was a lawyer in my 20s of a woman client being murdered by ambush with a gun by her husband. I've had the experience in my 30s as a judge of listening warrant application after warrant application after warrant application of gun violence threats, gun violence acts. Ladies and gentlemen, I am also concerned about victims of violent crime in our society, and I urge you to vote no for 859 to protect those victims. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered on House Bill 859? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. There is a minority report on the bill, and under the rules of the House, 20 minutes will be allocated to the minority report. Chair recognizes Representative Keisha Waits to speak to the minority report.
Mr. Speaker, I'll be yielding my time to other speakers.
Who are you yielding to?
Representative Trammell and Holcomb.
Lady has that right. Chair recognizes, for the balance of the minority report time, Representative Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I grew up in a small town, rural Georgia. The Second Amendment is as real to me as any amendment to the United States Constitution. I grew up with a story where my mother's father, in a particularly hard time, took a rifle when the cupboard was bare outside and shot a quail, and my grandmother dressed it, and that's what they had to eat that day. But this bill is not about the Second Amendment. It's not about that right. And you don't need me to tell you that that's not about the Second Amendment. I'd like you to listen to some other voice on this issue. Like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. From Blackstone through the 19th century case, commentators and courts routinely explain that the right was not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. For example, the majority of the 19th century courts to consider the question held that prohibitions on carrying concealed weapons were lawful under the Second Amendment or state analogs. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Justice Antonin Scalia in the seminal case on the individual right to carry arms that belongs to all of us in this chamber and all of us in this state, the District of Columbia versus Heller. But you know, Scalia went further. And his Heller case and the analysis in that case is a cogent tour de force in the history of the Second Amendment in the United States. But listen to what he had to say relative to the question that we are debating and to decide today. Although we do not undertake an exhaustive historical analysis today of the full scope of the Second Amendment, nothing, in our opinion, should be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings. Justice Scalia on the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And what Justice Scalia's brought and revolutionized in American political jurisprudence is originalism, that we take words as they were meant at the time they were written. So when Justice Scalia talks about the long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms and carrying firearms into schools, that's been around since the Second Amendment itself. You know, sometimes we get to talk about the founders and what the founders would believe and what they would do, and we wonder, what would the founders think about the question on the floor today? What would they think about campus carry? I'd like to read you something to that question. Meeting Minutes of the University of Virginia Board of Visitors, 4th and 5th of October, 1824. At a meeting of the visitors of the university, and these are from the minutes, of the visitors of the university at the university on Monday, the 4th of October, 1824, at which were present Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Breckinridge, John Cock, George Loyal, and Joseph C. Cabell. They met and they wanted to decide what the rules would be for the University of Virginia. In the twilight of Jefferson's life, he decided he would devote his time and energies to establishing a public university for Virginia. And so the Board of Visitors that day, the author of the Declaration of Independence, the father of the United States Constitution, the father of the Bill of Rights, sat down to write the rules for the school. And they wrote all kinds of things about what time classes would meet, what you could and couldn't do at the school. But I want to read to you part of what they decided that is germane to the issue on the floor that we are debating today. No student shall, within the precincts of the university, introduce, keep or use any spirituous or vinous liquors, keep or use weapons or arms of any kind, or gunpowder. 1824, our founding fathers sat down and talked about this question. Did it implicate the Second Amendment to them? Did they think they were infringing on a right that belonged to the students? No. They were deciding public policy. They were making the same judgment call that we are asked to make today. Public policy, whether or not it is smart policy and a good idea to permit guns in class. And they decided that they weren't going to permit that. That's what the Second Amendment meant at the time. Now, I want to talk just briefly about the text of the bill, because Scalia was also a textualist, and he believed that you had a strict construction of the text and what it means. And there was a question earlier about the extent and scope of where people could take weapons relative to sporting events and where it starts and where it ends. So now you can have a gun in your car at a sporting event. You can't, under this bill, you can't take the gun inside to the sporting event. But you know what? I'm a proud University of Georgia graduate, and I have been to more than my share of tailgates at the University of Georgia. You know what this bill says? This bill says that you can bring your gun to the tailgate. You can carry it out of your car. You can have it there. That's what we're doing. Is that smart public policy? You know, there's a timely article today. Texas was the last state to consider a measure analogous to the one that we have on the floor today. And there's an AP story out of Dallas-Fort Worth that deals with it. Picked it up on CBS. And the title of it is Texas Private Colleges Are Saying No to Guns on Campus. And this bill, like the Texas bill, only applies to our schools. It doesn't apply to private schools. So now we're going to have guns in the public schools, but no guns in the private schools here in Georgia. And what happened in Texas is they said every one of the private schools would opt in. Well, listen to what this report says this morning. When Texas conservative legislature passed a law requiring public universities to allow concealed guns on campus, it also gave the state's private institutions of higher learning the chance to follow suit. None has so far. But I'd like you to listen to someone else who you'll probably recognize his name and his view of this question about public policy or whether it's wise public policy, and that's the president of Baylor University in Waco, Texas. Quote, "My own view is that it is a very unwise public policy." That president is Ken Starr, former prosecutor and judge best known for the Whitewater investigation involving President Bill Clinton late last year. And I would also note that in this article, that at the time this measure was introduced in Texas, one of the prominent opponents was the University of Texas System Chancellor William McRaven, While that name may not mean anything, he is the former head of U.S. Special Operations Command who directed the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. This isn't a measure about whether you're soft on the Second Amendment. This is a measure about what is the right policy for Georgia. Friends, in the last minutes that I have, I want to share an insight with you that my colleague, the representative from the 85th, has spoken to with respect to academic freedom. I stand before you today the son of a college professor. For practical purposes, I grew up on a college campus. I was there skipping rocks across Lake Knee-Deep in Macon. I would feast on the Kimbrough King, which was a version of the Big Mac named in honor of the worker who, in the cafeteria there, John Kimbrough. The other thing we're doing, in addition to debating whether it's safe, is we're messing with the space that people learn in, the space that professors create. You know, one of the reasons why it doesn't matter, the originalism is what matters to Justice Scalia, and so he looked at it at the time. But you know, there's an insight, there's something that he and I have in common and we share, and when I read the Heller decision, I think about that. And it's this: Scalia was the son of a college professor, a Romance language professor in Brooklyn College. He too grew up on a college campus. And not only that, he spent part of his professional life as a college professor at the University of Virginia School of Law and the University of Chicago. So when I think about this bill as a thought experiment, I think about the government mandate. Who would deliver the government mandate to Professor Scalia to tell him, Professor, you have to permit this in your class? Friends, let's not send the message that we're more worried about what students are carrying in class than they're getting out of class. Mr. Speaker, I would yield the balance of the time for the minority report to my colleague, the gentleman for the 81st.
Chair recognizes Representative Holcomb for the balance of the minority report time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's no easy button on this issue. And that's why we've been talking about it for years and years and years, and why it is so contentious. It's also why we don't have a national standard on this issue. And I want to say right up front, because we don't do this enough in this conversation about guns, that I understand the views of those who are in favor of this bill, and I respect them. I have a different view, and I hope that you will respect it as well. I've listened to all the remarks today very, very carefully. And one important point that I do want to acknowledge is that while we have talked about this bill for years, when it was brought to committee, there was no opportunity for the public to comment. And I think that that's wrong. I think that on an issue that is this important, that people on both sides care so passionately about, there should have been an opportunity for the public to have their views expressed, even if we've heard them before. What we know is this: we know that a majority of Georgians do not want this, let alone the chancellor, the regents, presidents of universities, professors, moms and dads, and many students. These, and not us legislators who do not have to run or live on a campus, are the people who will feel the greatest impact if this bill becomes law, and we aren't listening to them. I'm humble and self-aware enough to know that I'm not going to change any minds or votes with my remarks, but I want to explain fully why I don't support this bill. In America and in Georgia, there is a right to bear arms, one that has been ingrained in our culture. And what has also been ingrained in our culture is a tradition of not allowing guns everywhere for everyone. Instead, we've regulated guns to limit their negative impact on innocent lives. Traditionally, This issue has not been black and white and all or nothing. And that's because there has never been a total prohibition or a total free-for-all. And there likely never will be. And I fully understand the self-defense argument. And it's true that we have an inherent right under natural law to self-defense. I get it. And for lawful permit holders, I understand that you want to be able to protect yourselves and others. But our application of the Second Amendment here in Georgia, and candidly across our country, doesn't allow permit holders to carry anywhere. On the contrary, there have always been and always will be places where a lawful permit holder cannot carry. So there is a tension. For example, we restrict access to government buildings where there are metal detectors and guards present. We restrict access to courtrooms. We restrict access to athletic facilities, both public and private, and even on college campuses in this bill. And also under this bill, we will continue to restrict guns in dormitories and in sorority and fraternity houses. Let us also acknowledge that private property owners can prohibit guns on their property. In fact, one of the explicit arguments used to pass a bill a few years ago was that we should authorize guns in churches and bars because those are private properties and they can make the decision for themselves. In sum, the rights that are secured under the Second Amendment are not absolute. We should acknowledge that. In many places in America, guns have traditionally been a daily part of life, including for many people, families, and communities in regions here in Georgia. Yet this way of life, which should be respected, has actually peacefully coexisted with reasonable regulations that make firearms off limits in certain sensitive places, such as schools and college campuses. And this has been true since our nation's founding. So, while guns have long been important to so many people and in so many communities in places like Atlanta, Athens, Savannah, Valdosta, and Kennesaw, for just as long a time, institutions like Georgia State, UGA, Valdosta State, and Kennesaw State have been gun-free. And this is true of American culture in general. For even our founding fathers, like Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, and James Madison, the father of our Constitution, who were members of the University of Virginia's Board of Visitors at its founding, supported keeping college campuses clear of firearms. We don't need to guess the views of our founding fathers. We know them. And that is why I will say that our current law is absolutely constitutional, 100%. It's not even a question. If there were a court challenge, it would fail. So what we are dealing with today is a political question, a policy choice. And that is why we have different laws regarding campus carry across the country. There is no established standard. And here is another part of the debate that is interesting. This bill does not apply to private and independent schools, and they will continue to be able to forbid firearms on campuses. For those of you who believe that the private sector usually gets it right over the public sector, they're going in a different direction. I know that there's been some discussion about students who support the bill, and believe me, I respect their views. I understand their concerns. But I've also spoken with many who have different views and don't want guns on campuses. I've spoken with professors, both in the district that I represent and beyond, and none of them want HB 859 to become law. In fact, one, a conservative who lives in my district and has a bumper sticker that says, "You have all of your rights because of the Second Amendment," and I think the gentleman from Douglasville may have a similar bumper sticker. He also teaches at a public campus, and he adamantly opposes this bill and called me and said, "Please do not support this bill. I do not want guns in my classroom." So the views of those who work on college campuses and the views of students and their moms and their dads who don't want this should be considered. Now, Justice Scalia, and we heard a little bit about him, may he rest in peace, was absolutely a conservative and a strong one at that. And he wrote, as we heard, one of the main cases on gun rights, District of Columbia versus Heller. And what that case was about, if you can believe this, and it was only a few years ago, was the right to have a gun in one's home. Not on a college campus. That made it to the United States Supreme Court, a case about having a gun in one's home. And he was very clear, and he is an originalist. And he held, as we heard, these are his words, not mine, like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. He then said, although we do not undertake an exhaustive historical analysis, there is nothing in our opinion that would prevent keeping guns from schools. We know the opinion of Justice Scalia. We know the opinion of our founding fathers. And those of us who are voting against this bill are voting with Jefferson and Madison today. I hope that you will join us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Gentleman's time has expired. That completes the minority report. Under the rules of the House, the final portion of the debate will be the chairman's time, and the chair recognizes the chair of the committee from whence the bill came, Public Safety and Homeland Security. Chair recognizes Chairman Alan Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to relinquish 5 minutes of the chairman's 20 minutes to my distinguished colleague, the chairman of rules, Chairman Meadows.
Chair recognizes the chair of the House Rules Committee for 5 minutes of the chairman's time.
Good afternoon. I'm not going to stand up here and try to emulate Al Williams, but I did want to say a few things. This is not an election year thing. If y'all remember, I've done this 5 years in a row. We don't get elected every year. We come down here and ask you, do I think I'm going to change your mind? Nope. I know what the vote's going to be. It's going to be the same as it's been every other time. But I've noticed that I'm having Anton Scalia, I'm following that. Maybe if two of my colleagues had listened long enough, they'd have an R beside their name rather than a D. What do you think a landslide is for you down here to get reelected? What's a landslide? 53%. That's a landslide. 92% of all the slaughters and mass killings that were done or have been done were done on no carry property. 92% on no carry property. 93% of all assaults carried out with a weapon are done by somebody that does not have a license, that it's illegal for them to carry. Remember, we're talking about 21 years old, non-felon, in good mental standing, and I sometimes question mine being down here. We're talking about the vast majority. You're talking about private schools probably within a 30-mile radius of this building that had 164 assaults and nothing been done about it. Would one person that had a license, that was legally carrying, could have made or she made any difference? And the answer is yes. Plain and simple. Yes, one person. I'm not going to change your mind. I'm going to keep introducing this bill and letting you vote on it. I do believe in the Second Amendment. I believe it is this House right under the Constitution for us to make the rules. Plain and simple. It is up to you to make the rules. When you have somebody at the University of Georgia who spent 2 years in Iraq, got shot, comes home 20 years old, and gets robbed at gunpoint because he can't have a gun. Ladies and gentlemen, give me a break. I yield.
Chair recognizes Chairman Powell for the balance of the chairman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. You know, I had an opportunity to stand back and listen and sit over there and hear all the discussions on both sides. And I'm like Chairman Meadows. I don't expect to change a mind in this House. I do regret something that even in the days when I was a member of the minority party, that the party always took precedence and it took a position despite whatever the best interest of their constituents may have been. It was always to try to take an opposing position. And I sat there and I want to give a few thanks anyway today. I want to thank my good friend from Jasper, Mr. Jaspers. I want to thank him for introducing this bill. I want to thank him for taking the lead. I want to thank my dear friend from Cherokee County, Ms. Ballinger, as a female who stood up and who believes from where she speaks that women have just as much a right to protect themselves as men do. I want to thank all the other speakers. Did a great job. They spoke on this issue very eloquently. At the end of the day, you have a Second Amendment, and as the gentleman who spoke on the minority report, you know, they were very eloquent in what they said. And yes, the Constitution is up for interpretation. That's the reason there is a Supreme Court. But also, the written word of the Second Amendment stands for what it is. A lot of people want to move the comma. They want to say the comma in the phrase means something different. It does not. It does not. Now, as I listen to the members of the opposing side, I just want to critique a few things. I heard one of the speakers talked about making the observations that this was a movie set. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. In our society today, this is no movie set. This is a dangerous world in which you live in. There's criminals, there's thugs, there's active shooters, there's terrorists, domestic and foreign amongst us. What does that mean to you? Nobody says that you have to bear arms or that you have to carry a weapon with you. But that is your right if you so decide to exercise it. I heard some of the folks talk in defense of the university system. Well, I beg to differ, but you know, the university system, even though they may think they're in fact the fourth branch of government, they're not. The third branch of government, one of the three branches of government, is the legislature. And it's up for us to set policy and pass code statute. And that's what this bill is all about. I heard one of the speakers talk about his children and his grandchildren. God bless you, brother, because that's exactly where you are. At this stage of my life, I'm not near as concerned about Alan as I am about Brody, River, my sons, because I know, and God knows I hope it never happens, that someday their fathers may have to defend them of someone who breaks into a home or something of that nature. You know, we talked about the gun-free zones and the safe zones. You know, I look at the gun-free zones as sort of like shooting over a baited field. Criminals, thugs, terrorists. When you put up their gun-free zone, well, they know they can come in. Because trust me, they're not the people who have a license to carry a weapon. They haven't been vetted. They haven't been background checked to see if they're a thug or a felon or a convicted this or that. They haven't been vetted to see if they've ever been involuntarily committed into a mental health facility or adjudicated by a court of law as being mentally incompetent. The choice is there. The gun-free zones, they're a danger. Best example I can give you is I had an opportunity to sit in on the, to be on a panel discussion at the state bar back in November, December, whenever it was. And before the panel discussion that I served on, the chief of police of Marietta, Georgia. And when someone in there asked him the question, what was the best thing to do in the case of an active shooter? He did not mince a word. The police chief of Marietta said, the best thing you can have is a law-abiding citizen with a gun in their pocket, because that may disrupt an active shooter situation. So, you know, all of these things that we hear are quite interesting. But where's the real difference? The real difference falls between, and I'm not going to say total parties, because I saw members of principals of the minority party that have voted for pro-Second Amendment bills. So I'm not going to include all of you into the same pot. You know, you might cook in the same pot, but some of you have actually took up the right vote when you voted on things. Now, as I thought about all of this and what I wanted to say, and I understand that I'm not going to change anybody's opinion out here, but there are some other folks. I want to thank the gentleman behind the podium up here. I want to thank Speaker Ralston. I don't know any member of this House that's caught more grief than he has, because you can't satisfy everybody. But by virtue of his leadership, he allowed the committee process to work. He allowed the bills to be brought in. He allowed the committee to work, and the committee did work. We did hear the bill. 2 years ago, we heard the identical bill. There was 17 hours of testimony, and every member that was there the other day were the same people that heard this testimony 2 years ago. The same folks. I heard a member or two that said, well, they were aghast because their constituency didn't know we were going to have a hearing. Well, I also seem to remember that some of those members hadn't even been in attendance in the General Assembly for a week or two. And they might should have been there informing their constituents that we were going to have hearings on this bill, because it was known and was properly vetted. Nobody could ever say that they didn't have an opportunity to say what they had to say. As a matter of fact, numerous of the committee members were repetitious in the redundancy of their questions about physical impact, about various things that had no standing in the operation or in the debate of this bill. But that being said, kudos, thanks, appreciation, gratitude to Speaker Ralston for standing up on this, no matter which way this bill may go, because he has certainly took a world of flack. And he's took it not from the anti-Second Amendments. He's actually took it from the pro-Second Amendments. A lot of those folks who are using this as another election year gimmick to bash him unnecessarily, when there's nobody that I can think of that's been more about Second Amendments and about people's personal protection. As I talk about these things, we live in different times. This isn't the 1940s, the 1950s. Let me tell you, when I was elected to this General Assembly, the first bill that I passed in this House chamber was to allow you to put your weapon in the console of your car. At that time, you had to have it locked in your trunk, or you had to have it locked in your dash. The first bill I passed. And then a few years later, we kept taking bites to the apple. And then we came up in the federal government because of the Brady Act. Got so embroiled into the restriction of people's rights to buy a weapon. And I remember a good friend of mine at the time, and he's no longer serving, Curtis Jenkins, from somewhere down around Macon area, somewhere down in there. Curtis and I and some others, we passed the bill that established the concealed weapons permit. Prior to that time, believe it or not, you had a little old paper card that said pistol toter's license on it. Pistol toter's license. But we came out with a concealed weapon permit so that you had to have a background check. You had to be looked at and be sure that you wasn't crazy as a sprayed roach. And the necessity to that was so that we could protect the people of Georgia's rights, so that they didn't have to wait 3, 7, 10 days to go to a gun store to buy a weapon, because they already had the background check already done. And yes, we passed it, but then all of a sudden I wake up to all these emails that come from far out right groups that say, well, they call that a gun tax. Well, folks, that ain't a gun tax. That's a permitting for administrative purposes. And if you remember 2 years ago, the price got down to half that amount just for the admin fees. But I remember year after year after year, once upon a time, there was so many restrictions on weapons. But we used to carry weapons. It wasn't a big deal. Everybody carried a gun at some point. I would like to know about the gentleman's grandfather that shot that quail with a rifle. Dang, he was a good shot. Or at least there was a little stretching in the story of the family. But everybody had that right to carry a weapon, because even in the old days, restrictive of all of the laws and what was expected, there's two things that everybody always knew. The first was your constitutional right to own and to bear arms. And yes, the gentleman over there that spoke earlier on the minority report is correct. It's not absolute. We can critique it. And that's what we've done in this campus carry bill. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, you have a higher right than the Constitution, if you can believe it. And that's the right from God Almighty to protect yourselves, to protect your children, to protect your loved ones. And if anyone cannot protect themselves, then it's up to them to hope that the man next door or the lady next door has got that weapon, that they'll stand up for you if you're that weak and you can't. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the two rights that you have. It's inherent. You have a right to protect yourself, ladies and gentlemen, and that's all that we're saying. I heard the negatives about the bill. Oh, let me tell you something. Oh yeah, I'd like to see it go further. I think it's ridiculous that we can't put that someone that's got a permit, that's been background, they can't take it into their domicile, whether it be a fraternity house. But that's not what would pass. Quite frankly, I might have a little bit of concerns about taking it into a UGA Clemson football game. So, you know, that was easy enough for me to do a pass on that one. But let me tell you something. It's a righteous bill. Someone talked about going to tailgating parties. Well, let me tell you, you can take a weapon to a tailgating party right now. You can have that weapon in your car. And trust me, if I was at a tailgating party and my car was handy, I would know how to get that weapon quick enough if I needed to, even though I hope that that day would never happen. So there, ladies and gentlemen, when I talk about the changes in the society that we live in today, if you think this is a soft world, if you want to go to a gunfight and take a switch with you or a stick, then I would suggest that you look at the events of Charleston last summer. And no, believe it or not, the deranged young man that killed the 9 people in Charleston, he didn't do it because of the flag or the heritage. He did it because he was a deranged young man with a finger on a pistol. And if someone had been in that church that had had a weapon, then they could have stopped him before he started reloading. And then I would bring your attention to a little affair that happened in Paris, France, the epitome of liberalism. They tell me it's a pretty beautiful city, but the only time I passed through, they were pretty damn rude, just quite honestly. But let me tell you something. The Europeans, they don't believe in weapons. They have the most rigid gun control laws in the world. But we're talking about the same continent that fostered the politics of Adolf Hitler, that eradicated millions of individuals because gun confiscation was the first on that agenda. And then what did we see in Paris just a few months ago? The peace-loving Parisians went to bed drinking wine and woke up with blood on the streets. Is that something that you can believe in or appreciate? And then within weeks of that, we had another situation. We had the San Bernardino shootings in California. A very typical individual, a citizen, a natural citizen of this country who had married overseas, and then they became radicalized. No, we don't live in the same world of Ozzie and Harriet, ladies and gentlemen. We don't live in the same day of the Lone Ranger. You cannot expect law enforcement to cover every situation because there's not enough law enforcement out there. And at some point, you have to accept responsibility of the right that the Founding Fathers gave you, and that's the right to bear arms. You have to accept that privilege that the good Lord gave you, and that's to defend yourself, the right of survival. Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you to support this bill. This is just the next bite of the apple, the next step forward. No, it's not the end of the world, because I defy anyone to show me the statistics where anyone that has been granted and vetted a background permit has been the criminal and the culprits. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for letting me get on this little bit of a tangent, and I would ask you for your favorable consideration for House Bill 859.
The chairman has yielded the will. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of House Bill 859. The ayes are 113, the nays are 59. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 784. House Bill 784.
House Bill 784 by Representative Carson of the 46th and others to be titled an act to amend Title 33 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to insurance so as to provide that certain insurer advertising and promotional items will not exceed $100 in value, will not be considered an unfair trade practice or an unlawful inducement. This bill has been referred to the Committee on Insurance. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Carson to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I bring before you House Bill 784. I'm going to make this very quick. This was brought to us from our constituents and friends in the industry and the carriers. Currently, Georgia law does not allow for any gifts from an insurance company or from a carrier or from its agent to its customers, either prospective or current customers. To make any gift or rebate is characterized as an unfair trade practice. I have a couple items that are on loan from my State Farm agent. This is a pen and just a keychain. These are illegal under strict interpretation of the code. These are illegal under Georgia law for insurance agents and carriers to give to their clients. I know this is pretty much a practice, but
as of right now, this is not in accordance with the Georgia Code. The majority of states, actually 32 states, have a de minimis safe harbor to cover gifts from insurance agents and companies. What this does is basically put it into code that we're protecting insurance agents to allow them to run their business, but not give any kind of kickbacks or cash cards or anything like that for signing up for an insurance premium. That's all this bill does. The insurance companies, the various independent agents, organizations, and the Department of Insurance have worked over a series of meetings over the past 2 weeks, and I appreciate the chairman of the Insurance Committee, his assistance with this. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield the well if there are no questions.
You have a question if you care to yield.
I will yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Al Williams to your left for a question.
Well, my friend in the well yield.
Yes, sir, I will.
My daughter-in-law is a State Farm agent, and she gave me a beautiful golf umbrella. Will she go to jail for that kind act?
I doubt. Thank
she
you.
She a registered lobbyist?
I refuse to answer.
Thank you for that question, Representative Williams. I do want to point out that according to the rules calendar, the name of this bill is for items not exceeding $100. So this is a substitute, and if you could take a look, we have limited the amount in lines 51 as well as lines 89 to $50, not $100 per the name of the bill. But I don't think she would go to jail for that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I ask for your favorable consideration to protect insurance agents and your constituents.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 784 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of House Bill 784. The ayes are 170, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. What purpose does Chairman Coomer rise?
Motion, to make a motion.
State your motion.
I move that the rules be temporarily suspended so a bill may be read for the first time in assigned committee.
Clerk will read the caption.
Unnumbered House Bill by Representative Coomer the 14th and others to amend Code Section 20-3-374 of the official code of Georgia annotated relating to service, cancelable loan fund, and authorized types of service, cancelable education loans financed by state funds.
On the motion of Chairman Coomer that the rules of this House be temporarily suspended to allow a bill to be read for the first time and assigned to committee, is there objection? Chair hears none. It is so ordered. Higher education. If you have not signed up for an announcement, now is the time. We will be doing page photographs at the podium immediately upon adjournment. This House will be at order. House will be at order. Chair recognizes Chairman Golick for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Judiciary non-civil will meet at 3:30 in room 132. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Benton for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Human Relations and Aging Committee will meet at 3:30 in room 515.
Chair recognizes Representative Chuck Williams for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Resource Management Subcommittee of Natural Resources and Environment will meet at 3:30, room 514, CLOB.
Chair recognizes the Chair of the Majority Caucus, Chairman Hatchett, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Majority Caucus will meet in the morning in room 341 at 8 o'clock. And that's the Majority Caucus at 8 o'clock in the morning in room 341. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Randy Nix for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House Education Subcommittee on Academic Support that was supposed to have met at 3 o'clock will meet immediately upon adjournment in room 515 in CLOB. That's Academic Support Subcommittee in room 515 CLOB immediately upon adjournment.
Chair recognizes Representative Fleming for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Fleming Subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee will meet at 3:45 in room 403 in the Capitol. Room 403 in the Capitol. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Dixon for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Professions Boards and Commissions Subcommittee of Regulated Industries will have a meeting this afternoon. The time has been changed, or excuse me, the location has been changed to 515 in the CLOB at 4 o'clock.
Chair recognizes Chairman Weldon for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Juvenile Justice Committee will meet at 3:35, room 406, Coverdale Legislative Office Building for several bills. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Coomer for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Transportation Committee meeting scheduled this afternoon is canceled. Hold your applause.
Chair recognizes Chairman Alan Powell for an announcement.
Would the members of the Governmental Affairs Elections Committee come on over? We're fixing to start that meeting just as soon as you can get there. Let's get on there. Let's produce some more good government.
Chair recognizes the Chair of the Minority Caucus, Chairman Flood, for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., the Minority Caucus will meet in room 230 of the Capitol. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Pruitt for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House Planning and Community Affairs Committee will meet at 3:45 in room 406 of the CLOB, 3:45. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Jay Powell for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 1 o'clock Sales Tax Subcommittee meeting will meet immediately upon adjournment, and all the other subcommittees will meet immediately thereafter, and full committee will meet upon conclusion of all the subcommittee meetings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the Majority Leader of this House for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House stand adjourned until tomorrow morning, Tuesday, February the 23rd, 2016 at 10 a.m.
Chair failed to mention we had no birthdays except today is the birthday of the first president of this country, George Washington. So that used to be a holiday. The Majority Leader has moved that this House be adjourned until Tuesday, February 23rd at 2016. All those in favor of the motion, please, at 10 a.m. All those in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. This House is adjourned until Tuesday at 10 o'clock a.m.